Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of RFJ's Comic Book Reviews. Today we'll be covering The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. Today's story, Spider-Man. This story script was written by none other than Stan the Man Lee, with the art by Steve Ditko. Now one thing I wanted to get off my chest is Stan Lee's saying of how Jack Kirby didn't really portray Spider-Man the way Stan Lee envisioned him. He said he prefers Steve Ditko's drawings because Spider-Man looked more like a teenager. But when you look at the Uncanny X-Men, Jack Kirby draws teenagers, and if you look at Cyclops specifically, he's not overly muscled. He is well drawn. I think there was something else going on that Stan Lee just doesn't want to say. Now, Spider-Man's first appearance was not in this comic book. It was in The Amazing Fantasy number 15. This will be his second appearance. However, this will be his first solo issue. Now, we open up with Peter Parker tossing his Spider-Man costume into a nearby trash bin, following the death of his poor Uncle Ben. We get a brief origin, which is almost identical to Sam Raimi's version of the first Spider-Man movie starring Tobey Maguire. The only difference is, in the original comic book version here, Uncle Ben is killed by a home intruder, not by someone random on the street. Similar to the film, Peter Parker performs in shows as Spider-Man, first for personal gain, but what they didn't show in the movies is that after Uncle Ben's death, he continues performing in shows. However, he's doing it now to help pay for bills around the house. He eventually runs into trouble though, because the owner where he's performing needs to start giving him checks for tax reasons. But Spider-Man can't cash checks without revealing his secret identity. Even though Spider-Man hasn't officially become a crime fighter yet, J. Jonah Jameson has already started to slander his name. For those of you who have always wondered, why does J. Jonah Jameson hate Spider-Man so much? Well, it's revealed in these panels that it's because Spider-Man takes attention away from his son, John Jameson. And this is what causes J. Jonah Jameson to become so enraged with Spider-Man that he feels like he has to slander his name to get the attention back on his son. Now that Peter Parker can't perform as Spider-Man in the show, he starts going out to look for jobs as Peter Parker, but no one will hire him. We see in one panel that a guy tells him he needs a strong man to work at the job. He doesn't need basically some scrawny kid, not knowing that with Peter's spider strength, he's probably the strongest worker the guy could have. Then Peter goes down the street, bummed that he can't find work, and he sees his Aunt May walking into a pawn shop. He goes to the window and he looks out to see what she's doing, and he sees that she's pawning her jewelry to help pay for bills. This makes Peter feel bad, and he decides he really needs to do something to find work. He even briefly considers becoming a villain and stealing money. Part 2. Now, out of all the comic books that I've read, I've never seen a comic book split into parts like this one is. We'll see that this one is split into 3 parts. In part 2, Peter, bummed that he can't find work, decides to attend the orbit flight of John Jameson. John launches perfectly, and everyone is in awe. But then a small section of the forward guidance system package breaks loose. The capsule cannot be steered, it's flying erratically, and it starts plummeting toward Earth. Peter runs to suit up. Once suited up, Spider-Man starts crawling up the side of a building when he overhears the military personnel talking about how they have a spare guidance system, but they just can't get it to John Jameson. Before I go on with this, I want to tell you that the military does try other methods to bring John Jameson down safely to Earth. And although I won't go into specific detail, all of the ideas they have are absolutely ludicrous. Spider-Man climbs into the building and he lets them know that he'll take it. Before they can argue, he grabs the spare guidance system and he swings off. Nobody has time for you, man. We switch panels and we see Spider-Man in the cockpit with a pilot who's telling him that although it may cost him his job or even his rank, he's willing to bet on Spider-Man that he's the guy to save John Jameson, and he flies him up to get closer to the shuttle that John Jameson is crashing down to Earth in. Spider-Man manages to get on the ship with John Jameson, and he starts scrambling to the top to get the guidance system on. Welcome to part 3, the final section of this comic book. So Spider-Man makes it to the top of the shuttle and he attaches the new guidance system. Earlier in the issue, they made it seem like if Spider-Man was able to attach this guidance system to the shuttle, J. Jonah Jameson would regain some control and be able to pilot himself safely to Earth. All that really happens though is this guidance system shuts down all the systems and it releases a parachute. But either way, John Jameson floats safely back to Earth. Some time passes and Peter Parker picks up a newspaper thinking that J. Jonah Jameson will be grateful that Spider-Man saved his son. But when he sees that J. Jonah Jameson is furious, he decides to find out why. He keeps reading and he realizes that in J. Jonah Jameson's view, Spider-Man took all the spotlight away from his son's first flight. This issue ends on the FBI under a lot of pressure from JJJ's newspaper and people who are reading it to put out a warrant for Spider-Man's arrest. Now we get to Spider-Man vs. the Chameleon. It's a bonus story in The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1, although it could have been its own issue as issue number 2. But for whatever reason, Stan decided to just put it into this one. This story is only about 9 pages long, so the events here happen very quickly. We start back again with Peter Parker trying to figure out a way to make money, and he decides he should join the Fantastic Four. So he dresses up as Spider-Man and tries to break into their building. He thinks this will impress them. He makes it into the window and they catch him in a plexiglass cage. But he uses his spider strength to force the doors open, and he starts fighting with the Fantastic Four. Do you know Susan Storm, the Invisible Woman? Well, here in 1963, she's still known as the Invisible Girl, despite being an adult. I think it's interesting that they would have even made her the Invisible Girl as an adult, yet made Spider-Man, who's a teenager. Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, decides to pause the battle and ask Spider-Man what it is he even wants. So Spider-Man reveals his plan. He wants to join the Fantastic Four, and he thinks that by fighting them, they'll get to see what he can do and be impressed by him. It's at this point that the Fantastic Four reveals that they're a non-profit organization. All the money that they get goes towards scientific research. They don't profit from it at all. We switch scenes to the Chameleon, his very first appearance, where he's impersonating a janitor, and he uses this disguise to gain access to a restricted area where he takes the identity of a Professor Newton. His plan is to steal plans to sell to Iron Curtain countries. At this point, we're not yet told exactly what he's stealing. He's just stealing plans. After Chameleon successfully steals these plans, he goes back to his home base where he sees in the news that Spider-Man tried to join the Fantastic Four. He figures Spider-Man needs money. How the hell did you figure that out, Chameleon? Do you always see superheroes trying to join a team and automatically assume that money is what they're after? It's just plot convenience. So Chameleon devises a way to contact Spider-Man. He sends out a message that only Spider-Man's spider sense can pick up. Kind of the way Jimmy Olsen's watch sends out a signal that only Superman can hear. A funny thing about earlier comics is that the writers are still trying to figure out exactly what the characters' powers can do and what they cannot do. So in these earlier comics, you'll sometimes see powers able to do things that they won't be able to do later on in the comics, and sometimes you'll see them not be able to do things that they will be able to do later in the comics. I guess here Spider-Man can pick up signals that people send out to him. Unlike Jimmy Olsen's watch, which sends out a sound that Superman can hear, this is sending out a signal that Spider-Man's spider sense is picking up. Okay? But how does he hear it? How does he decipher what the message is saying? This is sending out some kind of radio wave, something that can be heard. Spider-Man isn't a transistor radio. He may be able to pick up on the sound, but he can't decipher what it exactly says. I don't know. When was the last time you saw an elevator operator? This time, the Chameleon decides to steal missile defense plans, and he's going to be impersonating Spider-Man. The people that he's stealing the plans from actually believe he is Spider-Man and that he's a traitor to his country. However, he doesn't use wrist shooters to shoot the web. He uses a gun that, in his own words, shoots webbing similar to Spider-Man's, but not as strong. You would think that people who have seen Spider-Man have seen that Spider-Man doesn't use a gun, he just shoots it directly from his wrists. But anyway, the Chameleon escapes with the plans right as Spider-Man's arriving, and the guards. Funny thing about this is, Spider-Man webs these guards and then he escapes. Spider-Man can tune his spider sense? I'm really starting to subscribe to the theory that his spider sense is actually a transistor radio. Spider-Man sees a helicopter flying and decides that this is the culprit's getaway vehicle, so he decides to pursue. This is where we'll see Spider-Man for the very first time create his web parachute. Eventually he catches up to the helicopter, but this brings up another interesting question. Just like earlier when Chameleon somehow figured that Spider-Man needed money and that's why he was trying to join the Fantastic Four, how did Spider-Man figure out that Chameleon was using this specific helicopter as a getaway plane? Plot convenience. The Chameleon is a commie. Also, on a side note, the Chameleon is Spider-Man's first costumed foe. Definitely not his last, but this should be an occasion marked as historic. You would think that the Green Goblin or Venom would be his first costume foe, but it was the Chameleon. Spider-Man eventually catches up to the Chameleon and manages to capture him while police officers arrive on the scene. However, the Chameleon manages to get out of the police officer after Spider-Man hands him over, and he quickly runs into another room and changes into a police officer disguise. Then he gets mixed up with the other officers and everyone's confused. He's detected by Spider-Man's spider sense, and this is actually one of the first times we see it being used the way it'll normally be used. When Spider-Man detects who the Chameleon really is, he tries to web him, but his web fluid is out. Why doesn't Spider-Man's web shooters have some kind of system that alerts him when it's running low or when it's out? There should be like a blinking light that flashes when it's running low and maybe a sound that plays when it's completely out. Because this is the first time we see this happen, but it definitely will not be the last. There will be many more times in future comic books when he really needs to shoot someone with his webbing or just use it in general and he's out. And although we see that he carries spares under his costume on a belt, it's much more convenient for him to have some kind of system that would tell him that he's running low or that he's out now. Spider-Man does, however, manage to catch the Chameleon and he hands him over to the guards. A big ol' fight happens again and Spider-Man just gets frustrated and he's like, yo, I'm out of here. And he leaves the guards to catch Chameleon, which they eventually do after all their bumbling. We see Spider-Man though walking down an alleyway, depressed that everything he does ends up in failure, or no matter how many people he saves, everyone still hates him. This is where we end The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. Thank you for watching RFJ's comic book reviews. Thanks for sticking around and watching The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 1. Stay tuned for next Monday's episode of The Amazing Spider-Man issue number 2. I decided to call this Amazing Monday, so come back for next week's Amazing Monday. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you like the video, give me a thumbs up. If you have something to say or add on to what I've already said, or just want to ask me a question about something that you might have seen, or just wanted to know about the comic since I've read it in detail, leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next Monday. Welcome to The Wire, where we'll brief you local and international news of the week so that you can stay more informed during your busy schedule.